Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are in YouTube and trying to find your way to Makana, which is where we answer questions and chat, you have to go to Zoom. You'll see a link down below, and then go to from Zoom. You can find your way to Makana, and there you can ask questions. And this whole show is all run on questions. It is the whole thing is run by you, and you are the producers. And so it's really important when you can, is come up here. Think about the questions, think about what you need to learn about media or virtual production, and throw it in there. If you think you can answer some of those questions, then what we'd love to do is have you jump on and become part of this panel. It's a great way to share your knowledge with everybody else. So if you think you know a little bit better or as well as we do, it'd be great to have you. You can try out your kit if you want to come a little early to make sure that you fit in at 6 a.m. and we open the doors. And then we do the mic checks at 6:40 to 6:43 in the morning. In that period of time, you can make sure that your audio and video is ready for the show. From 7 to 8, we have general Q&A, and from 8 to 9, we have something specific. Today, we're going to answer questions, and then Phil Lenger, who's here, is going to be giving us a little bit of a tour of his of what he does at Times Square. It's going to be pretty exciting. So anyway, that's pretty much it. I can stay actually for a little while, but I'm going to have to leave here in a couple minutes. But we'll jump into the questions. And I think Guy, we're going to hand the questions off to Guy, and then Bill's going to take over as I disappear. So anyway, Guy, what questions do we have stacking up?
First one's coming in from Mark. He says, any feedback or notes you would give from the inauguration show last night?
Go ahead, Alex.
Stop cutting so much. They were going from camera to camera to camera and it wasn't really motivated very much, even when people were singing songs and things like that. And it was quite funny to the extent that the BBC news channel had the same feed. Every once in a while, the British commentators had to say, "I'm sorry, we have no control over the cameras."
Yeah.
Even to the extent that they were showing shots from the wrong side of the building when things were happening towards the end. It was quite strange. But in general, it was okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
I just wonder which show they're talking about, because it seemed to me you had a lot of pre-show that was mostly individual networks or whatever. You had the inauguration, which was obviously a pool feed. You had a big set of, we're going out to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers and things like that in between, which I think also was done there. And then you had the show itself at night, culminating in the fireworks. So there was a lot of coverage to discuss in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, when they were walking towards the White House, I noticed they tried to stick to the Steadicam as much as they could, and that the operator obviously was, there's a limit to how long someone could operate the Steadicam steadily for, a straight amount of time. Yeah. And like
the Steadicam operator got to the end of
that. I could hear the guy because they obviously were using the cam mics at some point, and I could hear the guy just like out of breath and like. Cut something else give the guy or give him a golf cart.
Yeah. So and I think that at least on the live stream, there's they kind of took on this, putting ASL as a huge piece, basically changing the entire real estate of the show for picture-in-picture for ASL, and I feel like that's why we have captions. So that's I get that there's a difference, but it's an incredible amount of real estate that goes away for the show when we format it that way. So and so it was a little rough to watch. Go ahead, Alex.
Our feed didn't have any ASL in it because, of course, in Britain they don't use ASL because it's American Sign Language and it's a different sign language for English people from the deaf community. So there was a feed without ASL.
Yeah, the one that the YouTube one was a straight one was there. But yeah, you're right that they were there. So I think logistically those things tend to be pretty complicated of jumping from one thing to another. A lot of those are records, so you have to remember that a lot of things that you think are looking great, and there were some that were probably live, but a lot of them were recorded ahead of time and played out. So it makes it easier to bring that kind of production up. It's interesting. And next question.
Next one's coming in from our friend A. Mitchell's in Washington. How do people feel about the return of the dual SM57 mics on the Lectern after the past few years of a single mic on a long gooseneck? Benefits, downsides, looks, sound, etc. Thanks.
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm old. Nothing beats a pair of in terms of the look, the presidential look. I just love a pair of SM57s next to each other. I know it's not the best sound, but it just looks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mickey.
Exactly. In terms of aesthetics, that screams like, this is an important person.
Yeah, Victor.
I just smiled when I saw the 257s again.
Stuart.
Doesn't matter what mic. Redundancy, redundancy, redundancy.
Yeah, if put together correctly, the wires go down that podium and go two different directions from there, all the way out to make sure that you have it there. So it always makes me feel better when I see that. I think that the ones that they've been using for some of the other briefings have been Sheps, and those are the ones that are kind of thin and go up. And I actually think they sound better than the 57s, but the 57s look great. Bill?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually, in my corporate work, bought a pair of 57s, bought one of those bars, bought the same windscreens, and I had more than 3 people over the course of my career go, "Oh, those are the same mics they use for the president," right?
Yeah, see.
It's just
it's not expensive to give them the presidential treatment. Next question.
Next one's coming in again from A. Mitchell's. In terms of yesterday's big broadcast productions from the U.S., one big question remains. Who was the Podium Guy? Where did he come from? Who does he work for? Secret Service, Army, Waka, audio company, antibiotic wipes vendor?
Typically, that's Air Force. So typically that's the team that supports that come from the Air Force. I don't think I can say anything more than that, but Air Force. All right, next question.
Next one's coming in from Mark Hardner, and he says, was Alex involved in the auction show?
I was not. I was working on other things. Yeah. So not not my bag of worms. All right, next question.
Next one's coming in from Stephen Kimbrough in Berkeley, California. Any comments on the inauguration evening show? It appeared better than most mixed live and recorded sort of show.
I think we kind of already discussed that. I think it's good. I think that it didn't feel like, again, the hard part is that there are concert technical directors that if they're going to do it live, they probably should have used that are really good at doing that thing. And I think, and there's really high end technical directors. I'm not sure if they were using all of them. So next question.
Next one's in from Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne, Australia. Lady Gaga appeared to have gold-plated in-ear monitors that may have been integrated with the jewelry on her ears. Who builds monitors as jewelry? And will this be a celebrity trend in 2021?
It already is. Who's the one that builds those? Victor and then Mickey?
Yeah, they all do it. Ultimate Ears does it. When you go buy them, you can pick whatever you want. I picked the blue ones here, but you can do anything.
There's a company though there's a company that customizes them though that goes all the way. Mickey?
JH Audio, I think. And yeah, that trend in terms of turning in-ears into fashion accessories essentially has been around for quite a long time. And artists, musicians that have like close connections with their in-ear supplier, and Lady Gaga, I believe, would be at that level.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably.
One would think.
It's just a phone call. Hey, I want gold-plated ones.
Yeah. Lady Gaga called. Hey, Lady Gaga called asked if she wants gold-plated Ultimate Ear. They're like, yeah, we'll do that for free. Bill?
We'll buy a bedazzler, and I've seen that. I think I've seen people do crazy stuff with Swarovski's crystals and all sorts of weird stuff.
Yep. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Mark. He says, the USB output on the ATEM Mini feeds into Zoom on a PC. On the same PC, I want to use the ATEM USB feed to create an NDI source, but it is already tied up to Zoom. Is there any way to feed the ATEM USB output into more than one program?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Alex is going to hate this, but the answer is actually NDI. Feed the ATEM Mini's USB into the computer into OBS or vMix and use an NDI output to any software you want to run downstream of that, such as going into Zoom while you're going out to other sources or other devices.
Beiju?
Yeah, on the Mac, Loopback, obviously, you feed the ATEM source into Loopback, then it can be subscribed to multiple softwares, you can use it. On Windows, you can use something like VoiceMeter or vMix to do that for you as well.
Great. And a reminder that we were very efficient because we were answering a lot of questions really fast, but we're burning through the questions very fast. So this is your day. This is your day to ask questions because we're moving at a different velocity, and we're going to run out of questions in about 5 minutes at the rate we're going. So so if you've got questions right now for people about media production or virtual production, this will be a good time to do it. Otherwise, we'll have more time to hang out with Phil. All right, next question.
You've got questions, we've got answers. Next one's coming in from Lawrence in Hermosa Beach. During a Zoom webinar, playback of a 30 frames per second movie file suffered significant frame drops. 12 frames per second. Whoa, somebody just moved my...
You got to move those. So you just got to make sure you close one and open the other one. That's all.
Thanks. Using QLab into ATEM video feed, frame seems to drop during fast-moving sequences and recover for talking heads. Stats reported 25 milliseconds latency and 0% packet loss. Any clues?
Then I guess the question is that happening at the switcher level or at the Zoom level? I think that's the, yeah, go ahead, Lawrence.
It's on the Zoom level. So I tested a meeting, and I played the movie. Everything was 720p, 30 frames a second, solid. And then when I entered the client's webinar, it started to drop all over the place.
But in the webinar, and were you screen sharing or were you pushing it as video?
Pushing it as video through my ATEM playback from QLab, and it was mostly during fast action movement. It seemed to drop, and then when it was a talking head, it recovered to 24 frames, but never 30. It was weird.
I mean, what that really sounds like is a constant bit rate problem with high motion. So basically, it has a certain budget that's not very high to manage all the content that goes out. Fast moving video is notorious in real time, will notoriously break up or slow down. So it'll either tear or it'll slow down the frame rate. And it looks like in this case, Zoom has decided to slow the frame rate down rather than tear the video. And it has to make a decision. If you start with fast moving, it's one of the reasons that, for instance, a lot of us, because we've done a lot of this real time stuff, don't use a lot of blends, a lot of dissolves, is because the dissolves defeat the temporal compression or the spatial compression or both. And so a lot of us will do hard cuts for everything because it affects compression. And so in the same way, handheld, shaky, things with busy backgrounds that are blowing, like if someone's outside, all those things will defeat it'll either cause a spatial anomalies or temporal anomalies. And it's oftentimes when it goes down to a frame rate, it doesn't always get back up to the same one either. When it gets shaken, it doesn't always come back. Mickey, Bill, and then Stuart.
Yeah, what resolution was the webinar at, Lawrence? Because I've done a lot of comparisons, and it seems to be that 1080p has been the least stable, at least in my testing.
Yeah, I used a portal to bump it to 720p, and the movie was 1080.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to test it at pushing it at 720. I know that'll sound crazy, but I think that the ingest going in might be still trying to do 1080p, and so it's trying to push that 1080p up, and then it's falling apart literally in transport. So I would try a 720p source if you're only getting up to 720. Number one, and number two is it may just be that too much movement at 720p. You'll find at 640 by 360 it might work just fine, but that's a lot of times why both Google for a long time with Hangouts and why Zoom, it's one of the reasons you keep those resolutions low, is so that you can fit into that constant bit rate and have a lot of room for that type of thing. Go ahead. And we have to remember that Zoom's really built for people talking heads, which is what we're using it for. Bill, and then Stuart, and then Mickey.
Yeah, back in the days when I was shooting a lot, and particularly in the earlier analog days, we used to do a lot of swish pans and things like that. It was a technique that can look really good in analog, where you move a camera real fast, typically between one frame shot and hopefully settling at the end of it on another one. But in slow motion, it's a really lovely look, but that is a look that absolutely crushes the ability to compress anything. So if you're moving around quickly, as we've migrated into this digital era, I've actually dropped a lot of those old techniques that were really useful in the analog era, because it just makes things incredibly hard to compress. And I just would try to stay away from that kind of motion if you can.
And I'm going to sign off and hand it off to Bill. And I'll see you guys all tomorrow. All right, see you later.
Okay, moving along.
I'm watching Phil's from a distance. I can't wait to see it. All
right. Stuart had his hand up next. Then we're going to go back to Lawrence. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, swish pans, a great way of hiding edits in action films. Lawrence, you said that when you joined the webinar with the client, the issues started. I'd have a look to see if maybe they've got some legacy network equipment. Just make sure it's all up to spec. If they've got 100 megabits switch somewhere in the link, it could just reduce the bandwidth enough to have an effect as well. So, but everything we've said about constant bit rate is what to look at first.
Lawrence, go ahead.
Yeah, I understand all the bitrate issues. The only thing that I still mystery to me, so I set up a test meeting on my end in my studio here. I have 500 meg up and 500 down. I have a very fast internet. I simulated the whole thing in a meeting. And I looked at another device and I looked at my stats in Zoom. Everything was 720p, 30 frames a second the whole time. So that worked. But then my client who's hosting the webinar in another location made me co-host. I came in and then I piped the video through his webinar, and that's why it went wrong. So it was a different location. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's part of the reason.
I'd be having a look to see if they're on Wi-Fi as well then, and what sort of connection they've got to the internet, because clearly your connection when you tested was a high enough bandwidth and theirs wasn't.
Mickey, then Chris Comfort. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, curious if you've tried to test out a different internet provider. That's a variable that could, say, for example, because on corporate accounts in Zoom, you're able to select which set of servers to that you want your accounts to connect to. So maybe your client whose event it was specifically chose to use a specific set of servers in the US or some other country, some other continent. So maybe that's a possible cause for the issues.
Chris?
On top of what Mickey just said, the ISPs can also scale the amount of data that a client gets. So if they're reducing it at their end, that's going to impact you as well.
Okay, now Chris.
Tucker suggested, if it's appropriate for both us and for Lawrence, for him to maybe play a segment right now to see what happens if it's possible. Just to see if, and again, I don't know if it's appropriate for either of us or any of us, but.
Well, the question is Lawrence set up to do that?
Right.
I can, if it's appropriate for the show, I can quickly do it. Yes, sure.
Well, yeah, this is a tech problem that people face, and that's exactly what we're here to address for people. So if you've got it, yeah, let's do it. Let's take a look.
I got it right here. I'm just firing up QLab. So
while he's pulling that up, I think that there's some reflectors that occur in Zoom's way that it operates. It's not dependent on who's pulling you, so their internet doesn't count. It goes up to the cloud or to their servers, and then it pushes from there. So Stuart, with the dependencies, I don't think that in my experience, I haven't seen that whoever's pulling on you that it has anything to do with what you're sending.
Whoa, whoops, a little loud, Lawrence.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Get your audio in level, then we'll all take a look. This will be fun.
Yeah.
It was loud, but it was smooth.
Sorry. Audio levels, QLab.
It was nice music.
So it's all very dark, but this is.
I am your spaniel, and Demetrius, the more you beat me, I will.
So how long until some of these switch
pans? I'm getting 29, 30 frames per second right now at 1080p.
So the deed is done. Oh, good. It was quick. We won't get hit by the pretty woman copyright holders.
Fall in love with a bee. Oh no, Demetrius wants Helena, needs to stay.
1920 by 1080, varying from 14 frames at the moment when I started speaking, but it was 28 frames before I did.
But yeah, on this specific scene for me, it's dropping down to 14, 15, 16.
Yeah, I'm sending 15, so it cannot keep up on my end.
Yeah, they've done a lot of processing to those frames. I mean, it's filter on top of filter on top of filter.
So this is 24 frames now, 30 frames, and then when I go to the dark scenes, let's see. So yeah, So now I have 30, but 29.
Yeah,
So
I imagine like when you have all the grain coming out on screen, when you have all those like little scratches, film grain on the picture, it takes a lot of a lot of you know,
It
a lot
just
of
hits
the
compression hard. You're
Exactly.
really
That makes
requiring the frame compression to work its tail end off to make all that viewable and transmittable. So I just think that's the way it's created. I mean, this is where artistic, which is incredibly valid, meets technological requirements, and they're in conflict because you can do things, but that are hard for the video stream out to real people to pass along. Jeffrey and then Guy.
Like I said in the pre-show, wait till next week. The new version of Zoom is supposed to have a feature where you can upload video into the Zoom, and it might have better quality that way.
It'd be interesting if they do bespoke compression right for Zoom that they're vetting to make sure it's exactly right. Guy and then Stuart. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I believe what Jeffrey said is correct, is that it'll most likely put it into its compressor, and so that it's easier to decompress and it'll just play back smoothly. But Lawrence, I'd love to throw that file up on my vMix in the cloud instance and then push it from there and see if it has anything to do with what's going on, because we can push it with 10,000 megabits per second solid connection. It takes the internet part out of it, because there's those hops that you get. If you were to do a ping, you would see how many hops it takes. So it could be that, but I'm betting that it is just wreaking havoc on the compressor because it's stuttering like that at the dizzying fine detail spots. And so I think that whatever processor that is that's doing it is just not fast enough to keep up.
Okay,
And I don't
Stuart
think
and
it's your
Chris,
compute.
let's go
And I-
quickly,
and-
guys,
and I
because we
think
now
it's-
have the question queue filled back up. Go, Stuart.
Just quickly, Jeffrey, I think
Artistic
it's going to be
choices.
another week before that update. If you
I'm
check
sorry,
the
John,
latest-
say it one more time. I missed the beginning of that.
on Jeffrey's comment about the Zoom, I think they're delaying that a week. It was
Okay, so it
listed,
may not
but
come out next week, it may come out
was
the week
listed
after.
January 25th, but I think it should be another week.
Okay, Stuart, then Chris, and then we'll move on. Quickly.
Yeah, artistic choices aside, Lawrence, I didn't see anything on there that people would complain about quality-wise. It didn't really drop below to the point where it stuttered. So as long as it was that or better on your presentation, I don't think anyone would have any reason to complain. I mean, that's better than what most broadcast news is these days when they do a live cross to a reporter with a mobile phone.
Chris?
I was just going to reflect what Mike Keeping was saying in the chat, which is, does the level of the account that the client had reflect any of this stuff or affect any of it? Like whether he's got a pro account or not, or they have a pro account or not?
Well, I would imagine that if the hop for the video is going through them and then out to the web, then yes, their processing or pass-through thing would do it. Real quick, Roscoe, and then let's move on because we're going to get tired.
Well,
We get
okay.
a lot of questions suddenly.
Let's move on because it's a little more in depth what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
Just if
we've been on this for a good little bit, so go ahead, Guy. Let's.
Next one's coming in
Cycle.
from Alex in Toronto. He's asking, has anyone used Audinate DVS to feed a DAW, specifically Pro Tools?
Any Audinate users? Mickey is here.
Yeah, definitely use the virtual sound card as the playback engine Pro Tools with no issues.
Okay.
One thing, of course, you have to keep in mind is you have to dedicate some channels as your monitoring channels for Pro Tools, because in Pro Tools you can't select separate input and output interfaces. It has to be the same interface.
Okay, let's keep going and make things as efficient, just like Mickey just did. TJ, go ahead. Or next question.
Next one's coming in from TJ in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My company just finished its first live town hall event on Teams. A decent first attempt and much better than the old WebEx. Lots of room to improve. How can I, who am way down in the corporate totem pole, show the right people how good it could be with a moderate investment in gear and time?
This is a big topic. How can you do proof of concept for corporate people about how good it can be? And I'll just speak from my experience as a corporate video maker for a long time. Sometimes it's hard to get the ear of people who can make decisions because they're making a lot of decisions on a lot of different fronts. And something like the quality of their video is pretty far down the totem pole. Stuart, do you have any thoughts about how to get corporate attention for a technical issue like that?
Yeah, lead by example. Make your own appearance, like when you're doing video conferences to other people in your workplace. Make sure that your appearance is fantastic and everybody will be turning around and going, hey, why is yours so good when mine looks so bad?
That's a wise strategy, Mickey.
Yeah, and although that's a good suggestion, Stuart, but I'm pretty sure TJ presents a very good example of what quality of audio video
Indeed.
and webinar and meetings could be. I'd say shoot the right people an email. I mean, it's worth a shot.
Okay, well, what could go wrong possibly? All right, let's move on. We don't have any more hands on that one. And go ahead,
Next
Guy.
one's coming in from our friend Phil on the panel in New York. He says, does anyone have actual experience with pro-level parental / user controls on wireless and wired LAN that work per device and per app? I've tried Circle and Netgear tools. Those are still very experimental and beta quality.
Who else has kids and or needs to do a lot of work with parental controls? I know
Seems like such a missed opportunity that somebody could blow this out of the park, but nobody has.
I mean, Apple spends a good little bit of time on their corporate stuff in terms of providing controls, but I don't know of any companies that have suites that are specifically for parents.
It's
Stuart?
a shame.
Depending on your router to the internet at the location where I'm assuming kids are living, have a look to see if you can put custom rules in it. You might be able to do something
I've got all that.
way
I've,
and literally
I've got
block
3
access.
routers that I'm going between, and there are no ability to really effectively do that with a schedule and without having to go in and rebuild your entire rules for when they're in school and when they're out of school and that sort of stuff. Especially with virtual schooling these days, you really need that ability to say you're allowed to use, Google Classroom, but not Discord and not, Fortnite. And that's what is needed by a lot of people right now.
Big question in this era where technical chops for young people are sometimes advancing faster than their emotional intelligence naturally develops. Victor, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what JJ McKenna is saying. DYDNS lets you put filtering at the DNS level so that you can get down to that specific website.
Then it blocks me. You know what I'm saying?
Well, maybe you're not emotionally ready for some of this content, Phil.
I could use a different DNS server, and I could put a DNS server on his, and I understand how that could work. But it doesn't work on time, and it doesn't work. There's easy ways of around.
So it won't let you filter by MAC address, for example?
No, not DYDNS won't. No.
Okay.
Let's do it quickly. Let's do Jeffrey
and
then Andy Carluccio, and then maybe we'll move on from there. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, two things. First of all, the router will have to be more enterprise level than something consumer
I'll buy
grade.
anything.
Yeah, because there are a couple of routers out there, like Rubin Networks, I believe, and because they'll even employ third parties that will.
I've got
routers
routers with deep packet inspection, and I can see what's going on. They just won't let me control it.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're gonna have to set up a domain and do it that way.
Yeah.
Andy, any additional last thoughts?
Just real quick, maybe throw a Pi in line with it if you need, that level of customization. If there aren't products on the market that can provide it, maybe you can pull some frameworks and throw a Raspberry Pi in the net and let it have that control.
I didn't want to
get
go
your
into
hands
a
dirty.
development business to have to control.
I was going to say, if you succeed with that, you
Yeah,
have
I
a
could
product
sell
that
it.
the world will buy.
I think so. Anyway, sorry.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
All right, Stuart's question might have something to do with all these cookies he's been eating. Fafa Fashion sat down tonight and had brand new pants. Pop the stitching. What's the favorite go-to brand for workwear that comes in blacker than black for work in film, TV, and AV?
So this is the extra COVID 20 pounds everybody's been talking about for months now.
Right.
Mickey?
These were the loose ones. These weren't even tight.
Is the key
And I've already
there.
replaced them to the shop already once. And these literally, tonight, first wear, pops the
Okay,
stitching.
Mickey, sartorial advice. Go for it.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the past, and I don't know how prevalent this brand is, but I'm a big fan of Uniqlo, the clothing line. It's a Japanese brand, and they started out developing fabrics for other brands, and they really worked out different kinds of fabrics that work for different kinds of weather. And everywhere I go that has a Uniqlo store, I don't pack clothes. I just pop into the store. I know what to buy. They sell the same thing in every country. So
Link in the chat?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
somebody's
sure.
put a link there, Uniqlo.
Phil
He's only
Lenger,
for
then
skinny
Chris Comfort, then Victor, and we'll close it
Okay.
off. Phil, go ahead.
My suggestion is save your money, keep your clothes, and hire Chris Comfort to just keep you skinny. He can do that. He has special tools for that.
Well, Chris is a workout guy, so he'll have clothes that handle workouts well. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I happen to have, these are not blacker than black, but these are the Carhartts, and they have a little bit of stretch in them. But also this belt is by Arcade, and I got this at REI, and this is an elastic belt.
Yeah, I've heard Carhartt a lot in terms of workwear.
Somebody
It's
else
one of those
posted
brown,
it.
like,
Yeah, this
Dickies
is
that
a
it's for guys who-
cotton spandex blend, and it's cargo pants. They're navy blue. They're not blacker than black, but they might have a black also, actually.
Okay, Victor.
I'll look it up and link it.
I highly recommend 511 Tactical. They make all kinds of tactical gear that can be used more than just for military stuff. Very durable, very rough. It take a lot of beating. So I'll put a link, 511 Tactical.
So they don't bump their prices off 10 to 20% because they use the word tactical in their branding. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, moving on. Next question.
Next one is coming in from Carl. He asks, is anyone using an iPad to control your ATEM Mini Pro? How do you physically hook it up to the iPad, to the ATEM? What iPad app do you use? There are several apps with different costs. Actually, have this one if you don't mind. I'll jump in.
Guy.
Strata makes one, and the one that I actually like is Touch Director. That one, Touch Director Mini. It's got macros. It's got the ability to punch in XML stream IDs, which makes it a lot easier than going in and doing it on the iPad or on the computer itself. And then I have it physically hooked up to a little 5-in-1 Zico. It's an Amazon brand. It has HDMI, Ethernet, and USB on it. It's a 5-in-1 for like $30, and that way I'm connected via Ethernet, but I can drop over to Wi-Fi if I need to.
Fair enough. Anybody have any other suggestions, or can we move on? Yeah, let's move on then.
Next one's coming in from James in Dublin. I'm really looking forward to learning ZoomOSC with Andy. Could you remind me of the day and time and how to register?
Absolutely. And Andy, do you want to just talk a little bit about that to make sure that everybody's up to speed on what you're going to do?
Absolutely. Real quick. So on the 30th, so the last Saturday of this month, and then through every Saturday in February, I'm going to be doing a training on ZoomOSC, and the goal here is that we're going to do it in bite-sized pieces that everybody who participates will be able to walk away with a workflow or at least a control surface that they really feel works well for their Zoom productions. So super excited about that. Alex and I still need to work out a couple of the details, but it sounds like it's going to be Saturday mornings. Registration will be in the same way that you register for office hours normally. And we'll have some more information coming out about that soon. We're going to give everybody a free copy of the Pro version for the month to play around with and try things out. And we're super excited to dive into it.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor.
Yeah, Andy, are you recommending that when that starts that we log in with ZoomOSC in order to take those classes?
You know, I'm going to publish a whole thing about, so basically we're going to divide it up every week. There's going to be a certain benchmark that we're going to try to hit. The first week, we're not going to really have too much. It's going to be about downloading it, installing it, getting set up. So no worries on the first one. Subsequent weeks, we might roll over into using ZoomOSC itself as your primary Zoom client. But sometimes it is nice to have it there in addition to vanilla Zoom, so that if you want to, switch your camera to show what ZoomOSC is seeing and doing, it's nice to have them running side by side sometimes. So I think we'll start with that, but we might transition out.
Andy, are you going to have a Discord link for this for the people who, for some reason, have to miss a class, might be able to catch back up by reading the discussion or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like Alex is going to do an experiment with Mukana to try to open it up a little bit more. But we'll certainly, I'll be following along in the Discord, and we'll work as a team to get everybody trained up and catch anyone up who misses something.
Great. Excellent. All right. Let's move ahead on.
Next one's coming in from Joe in Ridgecrest, California. What is the best way to mix our band during our church service for both in-house sound and going out to our streaming service? We are currently using an aux bus to send the individual channels out to the stream.
Oh, a sound mixing for two different purposes thing. Nobody's ever done this in the history of the world except every band who's on the internet now. And it is, and I just used to have this a lot when I was recording for video and trying to do some form of sound reinforcement for even just speakers, not necessarily a band. Band adds a lot more complexity. And I learned to love channel inserts and getting a separate mixer to do the mix for the other thing, because the mix for one thing always didn't become a good mix for the first thing that I was doing. Mickey, talk from a professional level.
The best way to mix. Ideally, totally separate mixer in a separate room. Ideally, where you're monitoring specifically for the mix for the stream. But definitely, like mixing via an aux bus with pre-fade sends, you can definitely get a good mix out of that done. Maybe some processing after the fact, wherein you add a bit more compression because web generally wants more compression, but you can still get it. You can get it done with aux bus mixes.
Yeah, I would just say the one thing that I learned real quick was don't just do the mix for the house and think that's going to be fine for what you're sending out. There's a lot of circumstances where in the room the bass may be too enhanced because of the shape of the room, or it may be too little, and you crank it up or crank it down, and you are really damaging the mix that is going straight out to an audience because you're trying to mix for a room in that circumstances. Jeffrey Powers, then we're going to go to Greg, and then we're going to finish with Mickey.
So it depends. It really depends on the mixer. If you've got an old fader type mixer, then you might want to set up a secondary mixer to do that all out instead of going through the aux. But if you've got a more modern mixer that can do iPad control, you can have somebody walk to another room with just an iPad and a set of wireless ears or something like that to listen and make the adjustments from there.
Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, and once again, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just my thing, but I'd like to reiterate that it's always best if you keep your channel volumes up. Keep your master low. Don't raise the whole level at the master, so that you have plenty of level to send both to the house and to the feed. Because frequently what happens is that the stream doesn't get enough feed, and you have to start boosting the level like crazy, and instigating noise and
thereby
things
noise,
like that,
noise sneaks in.
Yeah.
Mickey, finish us up.
And yeah, just one thing to bear in mind. Typically, most of the time, the smaller the room, the more different the house mix would be than the broadcast mix. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd just say is have a set of phones for sure. I'm assuming you're doing that. It's not just a live thing, and find a way to make sure that you can patch in and isolate listening to both those different feeds at the end of them, so that you know what you're sending out. You're not just guessing. Let's move on.
Next one's coming in from Tim Corbin in Baltimore. How are folks dealing with IT departments who are hung up on the Zoom being run by spies, in quotes, and being insecure ideas?
Oh boy, this is a bit of a can of worms. Let's go to Andy first, and then Stuart. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so I have to deal with this all the time, especially on the on some of the ZoomOSC stuff, because not only is it run by spies, but it's run by a 23-year-old. What? Like, so it's like, so it's crazy. But so I generally fall back on a couple of strategies. The first thing I do is I link them to Zoom's own resources on security. Obviously, they're so widely adopted. They have a lot of documentation. I'll throw a link in Mukana now, but they have security statements and things that describe the different certificates that they're compliant with, and IT departments tend to like to see that. The other thing that I'll do is I'll personally write a letter to whoever in the IT department I'm dealing with, and I'm very honest when I deal with them. I think that you can't really spin too much around IT, but what I will generally say is that if you can secure your LAN from, I kind of put the question on them, and I make sure that they have done the things that secure their end of things, because even with the best security practices in the world, you can still run NDI scan convert and get the video to some other actor on the network. So if LAN is secure though, and you've done a good job with that, then generally speaking, if IT is doing their part, you can generally show the documentation to show that Zoom's doing their part.
Well said. Stuart, then Jeffrey to finish.
I can't name the person, and I can't name the company they work for, because they work for them at the moment and they want to keep their job. But there are other alternatives out there that are hated by employees, such as those made by Adobe. The easy way would be to show people the difference in what Zoom can do compared to what the platform they're currently using. But don't forget that often those decisions aren't made by the IT team. They're made by the budget team and the accountants.
Jeffrey, and then we'll finish up with John.
The key is that the articles that they probably pointing to are over a year old at this point, and you can actually come up with articles that can refute that, and just have to show that to them that this technology has changed. After COVID, they put in all the security protocols to make it more secure. So you just have to point them that direction.
And John, to finish up.
Our university IT director went through a list of all the software they were using and did security checks with them. It turns out that the university was using a lot of software that was considerably less secure than Zoom, and nobody was complaining about it. Zoom is also very helpful if you reach out to them. They have very good things in their blog and in their statements.
Wait, you're telling me that there's misinformation on the internet? I'm shocked. How did that happen? Let's keep going.
Next one's coming in from Ernest Floyd in Bastrop, Louisiana. I need to shoot a meeting once a month and simultaneously send out to YouTube and GoToMeeting. Camera will have HDMI out and audio from mixer is USB out. How should I do it? I'm using OBS.
Okay, those of you who use multiple interface systems for delivering content, what do you say? Anybody have any ideas as to? I mean, I don't do this, so I'm a lousy source of things. Phil's going to take a.
I mean, I
swing at
can tackle it. The one question I would have is, do you need interactivity with both of those systems, or is it just a one-way spit it out to those systems? So that would be sort of the precursor to my answer. But if it's just HDMI out and then you have two clients, you could have two computers, one logged into GoToMeeting and one encoding to YouTube, and then it's a fairly simple thing. Even out of OBS, I believe you can encode directly to YouTube, and then in GoToMeeting, maybe even on the same computer, open up a client and use OBS as the video source to that. That might
Are
be
both
the
of those
easiest way.
destinations that Restream does? Would that be a simple way to do it?
Not necessarily GoToMeeting. You'd
Okay,
need
so
to have a
that's the-
client sitting there for feeding it to that, but theoretically you could just open that up alongside of OBS.
Okay, Stuart.
Okay, the mixer is USB out, so OBS will open that without a problem. Camera will have HDMI out, so how are you getting the camera into the computer? A HDMI
OBS.
to USB converter would be ideal for that. Yeah, but you've still got to get it from the camera to OBS, so that's the HDMI converter. OBS should send to multiple destinations such as GoToMeeting and YouTube at the same time. Otherwise, download vMix and have a go at the trial version of that for 30 days or 60 days. And you can set up multiple outputs from that. Or, and I've got to think of what we were using, is it StreamYard? I think does multiple outputs as well.
John
So
Preto
there's
had a
plenty of
hardware
options
solution that he was showing us. John, what were you doing? Oh, a Blackmagic video
Yeah,
recorder.
just a mini recorder for HDMI in. This one has the Thunderbolt out.
Okay, so hopefully, Jeffrey, one last little thing, because I know this was pretty technical.
The problem with StreamYard and Restream is you can't go into GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar simply because of the fact it doesn't accept RTMP, and that's what you would need to set up for that to happen. So the best thing is to screen scrape and use a software switcher or a hardware solution to go into GoToMeeting on a different computer.
Okay, Ernest, I hope we helped you. It sounds like GoToMeeting is the issue. It's a little non-standard in this way, but hopefully that gave you some ideas how to work around it. Next question.
Brant Kruger in Minneapolis, Minnesota asks, on the Blackmagic 6K, is there a way to get the startup state? Or a way to set the startup state? Figured out presets, but it'd be nice if the thing would just remember the previous settings on startup.
Have we run across this on gear before where you have to end up resetting things every day because it doesn't hold its startup states? Anybody work with a Blackmagic 6K specifically? I have one, but I just turn on the power switch and it seems to reset to where it was. Mine does not lose its startup state. So I know it's possible. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, that's just confusing because it should hold that. I would suggest to Brant to maybe look at checking the internal battery. It might need replacing. it should definitely hold that sort of state.
Yeah, I'd say the
All
same thing.
cine
Almost every
cameras do.
camera I've used in the last 10 years has a little button battery somewhere that's very hard to access because you only need to change it maybe once every 5 years or more. But if some reason they got a bad battery for that, that could not power, what is it, the EEPROM or whatever in there that holds these state things. So yeah, I'd look at that. My experience is the Blackmagic does hold its setups from power down to repower up the next time. So explore.
Bill,
There's
does that
something wrong.
6K have a fixed internal battery or a removable internal battery?
You know, I don't know. I've never had to deal with it, and I've only had it for a while. I'm looking at it right now, and it normally just sits here until I flip on a master power switch. It powers up.
I know the early BMDs had a fixed internal battery, which was their one bugbear that people didn't like. And if that battery goes flat, it's often used as the one to hold those settings on the original cameras. So,
okay. Brad, if you're concerned, I know the Blackmagic has good manuals online down to the level of detail that we're talking about. So I would check their manual, look for battery, and see if there's a replaceable battery. If there isn't, it may be a work order for Blackmagic to just tell them what's happening because it's not normal. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, Brent, on that one as well, I recall just turning mine on every morning, and it just takes on the last state. So I'm pretty sure that there is an internal battery because I powered it off with no batteries and it still came back. All right,
now, wait a second. There is one thing, though. I have to restore in Zoom my ATEM Mini settings most of the time after I powered down. So those don't necessarily stay. So if that's what you're talking about, Blackmagic has a way to save and restore the settings for the ATEM Mini. So just in the case that your Blackmagic 6K is attached to an ATEM Mini, you might have to do a restore on that daily, and I haven't found a way to make that persistent. So if that's what you're talking about, different ballgame. But hopefully that took care of it. So let's move on. Go ahead, Guy.
All right, next one's coming in from Alex 40 Goldner in London, Europe. Final Cut users, how do you legalize 0 to 255 graphics to Rec 709 16 to 235?
With a broadcast safe filter or some form of that, I think is typically the way you do that. There's a way on Final Cut, if you have a timeline and you're working with, you can put what's called an adjustment layer. It's really literally a blank title or anything you put above your entire timeline, and you can pop a broadcast safe filter on there, and that should legalize everything on your timeline to Rec 709. That's been my experience, and I do that almost every broadcast spot that I send out gets a broadcast safe filter to put in the right color space and clamp the values to broadcast legal. Anybody else have any other suggestions or ideas? No? Okay. Well, that's as much as I know about it, so we're probably moving on.
I'd like to jump in for a quick second.
Sure.
Sky just texted me and said that his segment with Hoda and Jenna went off without a hitch.
Yay! Congratulations, Sky, from the panel and all your friends here. So well done. Okay, moving on.
Nice. Vincent Alvarez in
Importantly, on
Bellingham.
the Sky thing is if you're on the West Coast, you could still see it because we're 3 hours later, 10 o'clock.
Oh, that's right. And it was in the last segment of today, right? It was the Hoda Hotbee segment that normally, it's about 3 hours into the show or
Pacific time will be during the 10 o'clock hour.
Oh, okay, great. So we could watch. Great.
Congrats, Sky. Next one's coming in from Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham. I was told circa 1994 that the second mic on the president's podium is only for a recorder inside the podium for historical purposes. Do you think this was true?
That's an interesting idea. I mean, everybody I know who's ever worked mission critical sound always loves having a backup mic. That would be interesting if it was wired that way. We all think of it as, oh gosh, in that 1 in a 10,000 case where the mic turns out to be bad somehow, we want a secondary backup, but maybe so. Stuart or Greg, do either of you have any idea about that?
Not even remotely true do I believe that would be. Think about the size of an audio recorder at the time. We are talking pre-solid state, so it'll be a tape-based recorder.
Some old wall in the
so
sack.
you'd be using a VCR. That podium in that particular application, the only thing that's going to be inside of that is ballistic armor. There might be a recorder somewhere else, but the second mic is for redundancy, so you don't lose it for broadcast.
Greg?
But yeah, I would excuse me, I would say that yes, it's typically for redundancy, but I wouldn't rule out some type of recorder in the Podium. I don't know, I mean, I've never heard of that, but I know you would, Stuart, but I'm just saying.
Well, no, a recorder now, yeah, because a recorder now is a tiny little device.
Well,
right? But a recorder in 1994 is a big tape deck.
So it'd be interesting to open the cabinet. That'd be probably an internet meme. What's under the presidential podium? Open the cabinet and then Photoshop in whatever you like. That'd be a fun game.
So Vincent, don't ever believe that guy again. No.
Jeffrey, do you have one last quick comment?
Yeah, I don't think he was saying that the recorder was in the Podium, just that the mic went to a recorder.
I doubt there's a wireless feed.
Only to the recorder.
No, it says quite clearly in the question, inside the Podium for historical purposes.
Okay. Well, maybe there is. If so, if you need parts for your old wall and sack, that might be a source for them if they've decommissioned it. All right, moving on.
All right, we got one from Vita Brody in Calgary, Canada. There will very likely be a federal election in Canada this year. Thoughts on virtual campaigning mid-COVID?
Oh, virtual campaigning has become a big thing. So anybody on the technical details of it, I am utterly ignorant about Canadian election politics, so we're going to completely stay away. But I don't think anybody here has any, I'm not seeing any hands. We don't know much about that. It'd all be a matter of opinion unless somebody's worked on candidates directly. Go ahead, Lauren. We got a couple of people. So let's start with Roscoe. You haven't appeared yet.
Just make sure you don't campaign during any hockey game. That would be my number one recommendation.
Or if you do, wear the correct jersey for the... okay, Stuart and then Greg.
A 3D scan of Justin Trudeau would be something that we could make a lot of money on.
Okay. We're veering off. Do you have something to pull us back, Greg, or are we just moving on?
Well, yeah, no, I can quickly see the advantages. You can campaign in all provinces at the same time. None of this, campaign schedule running around doing this and that, all the glad handing. Never mind.
Yeah, I think campaigns are going to be changing based on what we saw this last year during COVID. So we'll have to see how that works out. Politics isn't our specialty, so we're going to move on from the tech to more technical stuff. Next question.
Next one is coming in from James Babbitt, and he's asking, hi, Alex, for low-cost kits, do you send a single Nanlite Lumipad 25 panel, or do you send 2 panels? Note, or is it sufficient to use just 1 panel?
I'm going to comment on the sufficiency is often not the reason that you add lights to a scene. Almost all these panels now can put out a significant amount of light, enough to light a scene generally, particularly those kind of 25, Lumipad 25. That's a lot of lumens coming out. You add lights typically to fill shadows from different angles. That is traditionally the way you light at least a person. So the number of panels that I would take out depends on my scout of the scene and what I'm shooting. And I would typically think that I would like at least 2, sometimes 3 lights for the talent. That would be a key, a fill, and some kind of back or rim light for separation. And then you look at the background and decide how many lights do I need to make the background look interesting. And that could be anything from 1 broad to just bring up the levels to 15 or 20 lights if I wanted to do something really artistic with the background and light, individual plants or architectural details or something. So that's how I think of setting up a light plot. Anybody else want to pop in on this? No? All right, then I guess we're moving on and just get my ideas. Mickey, you have some ideas.
Yeah, as far as I know, Alex sends out 2.
Okay, so yeah, and you can certainly do that with 2. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of videos on YouTube and other places on single source lighting for interviews and things like that, where you use a key light, you use a fill card or a bounce reflector of some kind to bounce, and then you try to figure out something, maybe an overhead light or something if you need to do a separator from the background, or you can do that through costuming sometime. If you have a light background, a dark costume will provide the separation you need for them. And if they have dark hair, that kind of takes care of it right there. John, did you have a thought?
Well, I was going to say, we have to deal with this a lot with our park field trips, and we're not traveling with lights, and we're power short. So big sheets of white cardboard work wonders. And when we need to get some extra light, we put a sprinkled aluminum foil around it, and that's
For
part of our
outdoor
lighting
thing.
kit.
Yeah, we call them bounce cards, but you can buy foam core or just cardboard. In fact, foam core is kind of fun because you can find some variants that have white on one side and black on the other, so that you can use it for bouncing fill onto one side of a person in an interview. You can also, if there's something reflective or something creating light on the other side, point the black side to them and use it for what's called negative fill. So lighting is its whole thing. All right, let's move on unless somebody else has a hand up, and we're getting
Got
close
another
to the
one
end
coming
here.
in from Roscoe Jones in California also. Hopefully a moot question in 2 weeks with access to a native Zoom video codec, but do we have a preferred codec for Zoom playout today?
Anybody want to dig into this? We still have 4 or 5 questions with just a few minutes to go here. So, Mickey, real quick.
Yeah, well, Zoom doesn't really care what codec you're playing out because it's just seeing a video stream from essentially what it sees as a webcam. But any codec 8-bit and above would do the trick for Zoom.
Okay, let's move on to the next question.
All right, next one's coming in from Tony Mobley. What would have been recommended kits sent out for yesterday's events?
No, those would not have been kits. Those would have been trucks. At that level of production, they would have sent a full score grip truck to every single location with every possible thing to make this right. So you're in a different world at that level of national broadcast. So do some search on grip trucks and you'll see what those can be. You can get them up to like 5-ton grip trucks that have amazing arrays of stuff in them. Let's move on.
All right, next one's coming in from Larry, and he asks, any suggestions for USB capture cards? He's having problems with drop frames.
Stuart, you're going to talk about PC stuff, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, start with the obvious things. Firstly, is the USB card plugged into a USB 3 port or a USB 2 port? Make sure that you're recording to a secondary drive, not to your system drive. Have a large amount of RAM spare and turn off anything you can that's running in the background just to maximize throughput. Then start to worry about whether it's the USB capture card. And I'm sure both Jeffrey and Guy can recommend some high quality ones for you.
Yeah, let's do it real quick though. We're going to run over too far if we don't. So Chris, then Jeffrey Powers, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say Guy Cochran has the riser that I bought. I haven't used it lately, but when I did, it was great. But also that whole not plugging your USB card into a hub, but rather directly into the computer itself.
Nice. Okay, Jeffrey?
Also understand what your computer can do, and because you might have like 4 or 5 USB ports, but it might be going to one hub, and that might not be be working for you. So I can suggest, like Elgato 4K capture card that works really well without drop frames, but it's really all about that computer at that point.
Okay, let's keep moving. John Edelson's question. Go ahead, Guy.
Next one from John Edelston. Is anyone using the remote camera controls in Zoom for a device other than a camera? And if not, is there something you would like to do?
Remote camera controls in Zoom. We're going to do this real quick, so stay 15 or 20 seconds. Stuart, go ahead.
Not using, but if there was the option, automation for sound and lighting.
Okay, and some of the pan tilt head stuff provides automation for that for some cameras, so you might want to examine that. Let's keep moving. Go ahead.
Next one's coming in from Mark in New York. Lawrence has nice depth of field. What camera is he using, or is there another trick he is using?
Lawrence, camera and lens, please.
Lumix G7 with a 25mm 1.4 lens and a single Elgato key light.
There you go. Moving on. Oops, Guy, you're muted.
Whoops, sorry about that. Greg Yachts asks, are there any small point and shoot type cameras with clean HDMI for use with ATEM Mini?
Yeah, I use a little Canon Vixia, so that's my release kind of overhead shot camera. They have HDMI out and work real nice, and I think they're only a couple $100 at best. Stuart, real quick, and Mickey, real quick. We're going to try to get through the last 3 of these.
Okay, the obvious choices are GoPro, but don't forget they've just disabled ProTune for the app, so you've got to set it up all manually. Yi also make a fairly nice camera that's based on the same hardware. Again, these are fixed lenses. Sony do a small action camera that has very good vision, but again, fixed, so you can't zoom it. I would probably go with the Vixia or one of the JVCs, except for one tiny little thing, and that is some of the Canons, which is the Vixias and whatever, will negotiate down to like 576i instead of doing 720p. It's a bug with Canon with the way they've done HDMI, so it's just something to look out for.
Okay, Mickey, real quick, and then let's move on to the last couple.
Yeah, a camera that came out maybe half a year ago, the Sony ZV-1.
Okay, great. So there's some choices for you. Next question.
Next one is from Richard Mueller in Johannesburg. A sound man accidentally set his sound device's record timecode project base to 25 frames per second for a day on a 24 frame per second shoot. We're advising on what's the best way to deal with this as a fix and post. He didn't come to the gear check day because I didn't want to pay him to.
Okay, and Mickey's going to do this as efficiently as he can. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I was actually talking to Richard about this in Discord. You can bring the audio files into Sound Device's Wave Agent app and change the frame rate there. But the issue is if you were sending the wrong timecode to the camera as well, and you can't really rely on that, you'll have to set an offset in your NLE to match those up.
Okay, I think that's pretty much the answer to that. Let's move on to...
Next one's from Tyler in San Diego. I'm looking for a way to record some video with a 1/48 per second shutter at 60 frames per second on a camera. Does anyone know of a camera or a way to do this?
Boy, that doesn't sound like a good idea to me, because a 48th shutter on a 60 frame record is going to probably be offset and you're going to get black bars and some other goofy things. Stuart, any ideas?
The only way you're going to get that combination of speeds is with a mechanical shutter. 1/48 will appear on a camera that is running 1/24th or 24 frames a second, because it is 180 degrees of shutter opening. It's not something you'll see on 60 frames a second. For that, you will see 120th. And then derivations of that. But it's
Chris, you
really
want to pop in real quick before we move to our last one?
I could be wrong. I don't have this camera, but I feel like the Lumix line, the Panasonic Lumix line, has a really adjustable shutter speed and to frame rate. I could be wrong, but maybe something.
Well, we used to have this thing called ClearScan that would divide and allow you to shoot things at really odd, precise virtual shutter speeds, but it's not in very use much anymore because everything's kind of fixed. You got kind of a problem. If you must do both of those things, I would just say test before you're doing it for a client for money. Let's get to the last one. And
last one's coming in from
Bill, if I can, I just realized what he's trying to do, and that's called shutter drag. So it's where the shutter is literally open longer than a frame. You might find some very old HD cameras will do it, but it'll be hidden in things like night vision options on those cameras.
Okay. So opening the shutter for longer than it would normally do for special effects work. Okay. And final question.
Last one's coming in from Ernest. Our help desk department is looking into using Zoom for remote support. Is anyone doing this? If so, what are the pros and cons?
So, operating a support deck off of Zoom in real time. Has anybody heard of anybody doing that or have any experiences with it? Chris Fenwick.
I could say, just for trying to help, friends and my mom and stuff, that although you can share screen and although you can ask to use their mouse, there's a lot of things that are a little sniggly. So a lot of times I'll find myself saying, please hold down the shift key. Please hit the space bar. There's certain things that just don't seem to translate well when you try and drive a computer remotely.
I will say I've had really good experiences. The couple of times I've gotten really deep into something complicated in Final Cut and I've hooked up with Apple's higher level professional support, they're pretty amazing at being able to drive a remote computer down to the absolute, like it's almost like half a pixel they can move around. So it's possible to do, but I don't know anybody outside of that does it. Greg and then John Nicholson real quick before we finish up.
Yeah, I was going to say it seems like it certainly could work with if you give them control of your computer, they can bounce around and try to fix your little issues, not issues with Zoom per se, but
definitely not
maybe
issues with Zoom, because Zoom doesn't show you the Zoom thing. But again,
with your PC.
My experience is that just certain key combinations don't work as you would expect them to.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. John, did you have a last comment on that?
Well, I was just going to say a lot of people do it, and it's integrated with a number of help desk softwares to automatically scheduled, and it's very useful because there's a lot of people out there who use Zoom, and if you were going to have to load another application to take control of their desk, sometimes people can't do that. And there is a setting where you could have Zoom show the things that are normally hidden on your screen. So if you need to be demonstrating somebody where to look in the Zoom pull-up menu, you could show it to them. So it is possible to do that, Chris.
And this is entirely out of left field, but we did the Creative Summit, and Apple did a presentation there, and they actually weren't using Zoom. They were using a WebEx variant. That surprised me. They had everybody for the Apple presentation move over to a different platform in the middle of that. I don't know whether that allows them different controls. I don't know whether they built custom integrations on there. Security entirely.
Security. They felt more secure using WebEx because it was a trusted partner inside the Apple ecosystem, and they were nervous about leaving out.
Okay, so you're seeing that even the biggest companies are trying to go
I would
through
say
this stuff.
Unwarranted, but it was their internal paranoia.
Yeah, and they have a good little bit of that. They've got a lot of risk out in the world. One bad word and stock tanks, or not, well, it's not going to tank, but comes down a half a point and billions of dollars are lost. Okay, I think we've gotten to the end. So thank you, everybody. Does anybody know whether the after show is going to happen now?
I believe who's up? We have a second. It's 8.
Yeah,
so
I'm going to do a little quick presentation.
Oh, that's right. Why am my brain is on?
It's all right.
Pause.
No worries.
Okay, I sorry ran a little bit over, and we will go a little bit over, I hope. Yes, our own Phil Lenger, who, for those of you who are watching the show and don't know any of Phil's background, Phil is one of the guys who controls a lot of those screens and the content for them in Times Square, the crossroads of the world. So we're all excited because Phil has agreed to give us a tour of some of the technical work that he does and show us some, I think, behind the scenes stuff for how Times Square runs. So Phil, it's yours, buddy.
And by all means, jump in and maybe, Bill or Guy, you can keep an eye on any questions that pop up. I got a lot of screens open right now, so I'm not necessarily paying attention to hands.
I'll pop in if I need to. So just go ahead.
Interrupt me. And, I just want this to be interesting to you guys. It is a media and sort of an AV kind of a challenge, although a little bit different perspective on that. We're playing back video, we're using high-end hardware and so forth. And I'll just take you through some of that. And it's really just hopefully an interesting kind of a thing. I'll show you some pictures along the way. I guess you'll just spotlight me, and I'll just use my screen here to kind of show some of the stuff that we're working on. But the point here is, video screens in Times Square, and we do it also in Vegas and LA and all over the world. Really, we've got screens that we've worked on, and we play back. Essentially these can be all over the place in terms of size and shape and so forth. And I'll kind of dig into sort of how it works. But basically they're big computer screens, and we have computers on the back end playing back the video. And so, it's all about getting pixels to the screens and getting the right resolutions and color spaces and all that. It's all about scheduling and playback of video. And we have some sort of special tools that we use for that I'm not sure would apply. It might apply to what some other folks are doing. And then, ways of managing that. So Times Square is a real kind of a unique kind of a place. And we have some experience doing it. We've been doing signs since '99 in Times Square. We came from an event background and kind of fell into this space and started learning a lot about it and developing a lot of the ways that it worked. So we're doing a lot of work in that. I'm gonna make myself a little bit smaller so you can see this stuff. So basically, you know, the screens are big LED screens, and you know, they have strange resolutions, and I'll show you how we get to that in a little bit. This one that you're looking at right now is on the Marriott, is one of the larger ones in Times Square. This is actually basically a single screen. It's 10,000 pixels wide by 2,300 pixels high, it is designed to look segmented, although it basically is one big video screen, and it has different schedulers playing each of the little thing. But I'll take you back really quick here and show you sort of one of the first screens that we got involved in. This is you may have seen this on Good Morning America, or you know, whatever. This was one of the first screens that kind of was of its type in Times Square, and we helped ABC to design this screen and to build it, and to not just build it, but to think about how a video screen is going to work in tandem with a broadcast control room. So at this point, there were video screens, obviously, that existed already, but none could do things like wait for a director's cue and then roll a graphic in. You know, if you wanted to cue the talent to say, let's go to the weather board and see what the weather is going to be like in Kentucky, and then zoom into Kentucky, that had to be integrated with like a control room environment. And so that's how we got involved. We wrote the specs on how that ought to work and the high level sort of system diagrams. We knew a lot from our experience in broadcast about how a control room wants to work and how events work. So we wrote documents about, you know, how, you know, real English language documents so that the executives could understand what it's going to take to make this work. And then we also had to make things like templates. So what you're seeing here, the blue area, this is actually the After Effects template that an artist might use to design their animation on, and it would show them where things would line up. And so the interesting thing about this one, for example, if you look at the picture on the corner, you see the bands are in three-dimensional space, and so the images always got ripped and torn up to the eye, depending on where you were standing in Times Square. Well, the brand police at ABC really didn't like that too much, because their circular ball that they are paid to protect would get segmented and get shifted. So we actually had to write morphing software that would play into After Effects, that would reverse shift the images so that when it went up on the sign, the circle would look perfectly circular from a very specific camera angle. So it was all sorts of details like that that they wanted to have integrated into this sign. And then we built the playback system, because a playback system didn't exist at the time that really did what we wanted it to do, and controller router. So this is all custom playback software that we wrote. And then we also helped their sales, because they sold ads on this screen as well. We helped their ad sales department develop interactive tools to let people vote and chat and send pictures up to the sign. And this was all back in 1999, and that's kind of how we got our start. So since then we've kind of gotten the job to do other things. This is the Toys R Us store that was in Times Square, and we built a stock ticker of toy companies. We actually built this. This is a scrolling. This has nothing to do with digital video. This is a scrolling graphics system, but the control of it was all computerized. And those were big 6-foot panels of scrolling material that we built for the facade. I'm just going to take you quickly through a couple of these other ones here. This is the H&M sign we'll talk a little bit about. We also do a lot of the signs inside the stores, the Express sign in Times Square, and we do a lot of theirs. The M&M sign, if you've visited Times Square, these are all over the place, and you get a sense of the kind of variety is that's possible with all of these. We did a really cool one in Dallas, Texas. This is the American Airlines Arena and the entrance plaza, and this rendering kind of shows you a little better. These screens actually move along giant roller coaster tracks. So the show would happen and the screens would move along the facade of that track, and you could connect it, and then creatively you could make things go from one to the other, and that was a fun project that we helped design. This is Vegas, the Louis Vuitton store. It has lighting there. This is the fashion show mall in Las Vegas. And so the screens essentially can be designed to be circular, three-dimensional space, designed, and that's a different one. This is the American Airlines. You can really do a lot. So what I want to do is I'm going to quickly I'm going to switch my
Before you jump into that, Phil,
go ahead.
Take a couple quick questions. We got one from Stephen Kimbrough. He's asking, hey, Phil, how do clients audit their value, and how do things show up at a requested time?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me get to the technical pieces, and then I'm going to talk to you about the operation of that, and I'll get to that, because they're good questions, and a lot of people ask those. Let me first just talk about the sort of the building blocks of this. Hang on, stand by. All right, so this is the Lego block of a LED sign. Okay, this is an LED tile, and this is about 16 inches, 16 by 16 inches. Different companies make them in different sizes, but basically you take these and you put them together, and you can build anything you want to, and the pixels are built into this. So there's a close-up of each one of those is a pixel, and it's an LED, an SMD LED, which means it can make any of the colors or any combination of the colors. And then the distance those pixels are apart from each other determines the resolution. So just like on a video screen, we're looking at a display screen, these screens are talked about as 10 millimeter, 8 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 1 millimeter, and now they've got sub 1 millimeter resolutions. So the closer together they get, the better it's going to look. So that's baked into this panel, and then you take these panels and you put them together, and you can see they're made really sturdily. This is sort of the side view, so you can butt them all together and have no seams. Some of them are actually flexible, but then you start to build them into a frame, and each of the companies that make these have sort of different framing systems, but they all kind of work the same way. And you start to put them all together, and that becomes a big video wall of whatever resolution you want. And they all daisy chain together. On the back, here's the connections from one to another. They're usually proprietary cabling systems that each company develops, that go together.
Hey, Phil, how much would a rig like the one you just showed us in the last shot weigh? Is it a heavy?
They're getting lighter. So there's two types. There's indoor and outdoor. As you can expect, the outdoor are IP rated much heavier, and you really need steel and scaffolding for all of that. But the indoor rated ones are getting super lightweight. So maybe one panel might be 2 or 3 pounds. I mean, they're incredibly lightweight. And because they've taken the power supplies and they've offloaded those, they used to be the power supplies were built right on the back of them. So these things are made to roll up in a flight case and pull out like a curtain almost, and you can be up and running in practically no time. But then you can start to really build, whatever you want to. So those are the building blocks. Then the hardware pieces, I'll just quickly run through that. So to get to that screen, of course, you need a really nice playback computer with a great graphics card, and we use really, really high-end graphics cards in generally when we're speccing these things, because you need really good refresh rate. You need really good high resolution, of course, and many times we're driving these bigger screens. You need multiple 4K screens at once without seams. That goes into an LED controller, which is basically the brains of the LED wall. If you've ever used a video wall system, it basically takes the let me see, go back. So if you look in the bottom there, I don't have. You can HDMI or DVI-D can go into it, and then those holes along the top are just basically the proprietary connectors that go to the modules, and then all those wires basically just go. So it's a pretty simple setup in theory. It gets pretty gnarly when you're wanting to do some really big resolutions. So I'll show you. This is one of our screens. Well, I say one of our screens because it's a series of 7 screens technically. The Express store that's in Times Square, and I use this as an example because it kind of illustrates some of the complexity. So you can see there, that's technically the from the south looking north of the screen. And if you pull this out into sort of a schematic, here's what it looks like. So we number those screens 1 through 7. And then you can see this is part of our production guide, where each of the screens has its own sort of dimensions and resolution. So if you look there, number 5 is resolution is 1560 pixels wide by 1314 pixels high. And so if we flatten it out, this is kind of what that looks like. And then we build this as basically a Photoshop or an After Effects template that the artists can use to design within, and they can see how high off the ground these these screens are, and they can see the gap. If they want to build space in between the gap, they can do that. And then basically this is what a piece of content looks like after it's built. And you can see kind of how the video is built for this. And then you can just get creative with how you piece any of that together. And so that sign, there's nothing glamorous about the room. This is the room in the basement, a rack room, and I wish it could be cleaner for presentation purposes, but I hardly ever show it to anybody. So, that's what it is. And if you look here, this is sort of the front of the rack, and you can see that it's just a bunch of these are the LED processors that go to the sign. There's a series of them, and it's a bunch of old cheese graters that we've got. And what's happening here is we use 2 primaries and 2 backups. So the 2 on the left are the primaries, and we've basically split. So screen 1, 2, 3 is coming off of primary 1, and 4 through 7 is coming off of the second piece, and then we duplicate that. And that's it. So to answer that first question, then, so how do you schedule that? What's the software that we use to play it back? So there's a handful of manufacturers that make specifically digital signage software, and one of them that we like a lot for Macs especially is called Sedna, and it's SEDNA. And it's a German company, so it's the website is sedna.de. But here's a look at their interface, and it's a combination of basically of a couple things. It's a compositing tool, so you can see for compositing where the video plays. It's kind of a video wall tool, but it's also a scheduling tool, so it plays out the content. And so you can schedule day parts, you can schedule a morning, afternoon, and a prime time or something like that. But it also allows you to lay out where the content plays. So if you have a big canvas, you can put a piece over here and a piece over here. So there's a number of pieces, and then it has reporting ability, because a lot of these signs are playing advertising. You need to have a report to show your advertisers how often their ad played and bill against that. So it has a lot of that ability as well, and it's all remotely accessible, and we can control it and change it out as we like. There's a lot more to this software, especially when it gets to interactive stuff, but that's kind of the idea. allows us to get real interactive, and it has dynamic feeds. We can do things like insert all sorts of RSS feeds and data feeds and stuff, and create graphs and all kinds of live data and dynamic data. So that's the the basic how it works. So I think
that was
I've partly
fascinating.
answered that. Yeah,
I'm amazed. I would have assumed there was a lot of complexity behind that because it's such a big, prominent thing. But it's just amazing to see how it actually
on one
works.
level, it's pretty simple, and on one level, there's some nuances that kind of get you into the weeds, just like anything else, I guess.
Yeah, those curved signs, I can imagine it was been. So, Guy, why don't you dig through another?
Yeah, go ahead with a couple more questions, and then we can. Yeah,
on that first one, Stephen Kimber's asking, how do clients audit their value?
Yeah, I think what he's asking, and I believe, this is a question that comes up a lot. So advertising in any media is kind of on a broad level. How much does the guy have in his pocket? How good of a salesman are you? That's really what it is. I mean, there is a lot of metrics that are used. How many eyeballs theoretically are looking at a screen, just like on TV? How many people are watching the show? But these days, more and more, it's harder and harder to measure that with DVRs on broadcast and in physical spaces. You may count the number of people that pass by your sign, but in Times Square, there's no guarantee they looked at it, and certainly no guarantee they even noticed what the content was, because Times Square is really more of a collage than anything. So the idea is that there is some metrics around, 1 million people a day in Times Square. Well, certainly not right now. There's not. There's so many different ways to answer that. We don't get involved in selling the ads. We are show and tell is in a sense like a property management company, where you might have a building and a property manager. We don't own the signs. We operate them on behalf of the owners. And so they hire us to take care of everything from a technical standpoint, also creative. We actually work with the ad sales people to build creative. And then because we have an event background, we also are producing events on those signs or in front of those signs. So if we're doing, for example, New Year's Eve or some car rollout or some other, every day there's events in Times Square where they want to connect what's happening in the square with what's happening on the sign. So we have Twitter walls, we have Instagram feeds, and I'll show you one of those in a second if you want. But there's ways of connecting those displays to be sort of part of the action. Anyway, that to get back to Stephen's question is, the more attractive you can make your sign, the more valuable it can be. There's also tools nowadays that can use cameras, as you've probably heard, that can detect eyeballs and gaze and all those sorts of things that we can notice if a person is physically looking, and tell a lot about their demographic, whether they're male or female, all kinds of things. To be honest, none of that is really used quite much in Times Square. I know in some retail, we also do a lot of work in retail spaces as well. I do know that that's being experimented with in some retail, but that's typically shied away because the optics of it right now is kind of dodgy. But
I'm going
that's
to break in to note that we've got a lot of people who are very interested in this topic, and we've got a big list of questions
all
here.
Right, go ahead. Well, we'll rip through them. Go ahead.
Okay.
Bill, you want to go ahead and grab the questions? I got the kids stirring here for school, and they're
absolutely no problem.
Yeah.
So the next one here is Charles Klein, who says, Phil, what new tech do you see coming for those large screens? I've done dozens of graphics for that ABC sign and other Times Square screens. Seems like our paths have crossed before.
Who is that?
That's Charles Klein in New York City.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt that that's been the case. We ran the ABC sign for many years, and then they took it in house. So they're doing it now directly. But basically, the
question is: do you see new tech coming along to replace some of what you've already done?
We're designing some new signs right now. The big thing right now is resolution. How because that you're able to get these sub 1 millimeter screens, which are crazy resolutions and totally unnecessarily, frankly, in Times Square, because the eyeball can't, at a certain point, you can't tell whether there's 20 pixels or 1 pixel. There's a mathematical formula for how low the resolution can get, and then it doesn't matter anymore.
Do you see a brightness war? Has that ever happened? People want their sign
brightness,
to be bright?
because I'll tell you frankly, most of the signs we run at 40 to 50% brightness. We don't ever turn them up. I have some funny stories about how we've just painted Times Square from New Jersey. You could see what color a certain sign was just because of the brightness level. So it's not a brightness thing. I think more than anything, the biggest challenge is because there's a glut. There's so many signs in Times Square. They're frankly not selling all the time. There's availability. So anything you can do to get eyeballs is really, I think, from a technical standpoint, the challenge. So interactive things, ways of engaging, and I'd love to show you one here in a minute of sort of the example of that, but it's just sort of scratching the surface of what can be done. We'll get to that in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah,
a couple
let
more.
me do one more panel question, then Chris Comfort has his hand up, so we'll do him. For the panel question, for new content, this is from Mickey. Do you play out tests on the actual screens, or do you have separate physical screens to do tests on?
Well, so what we do is we've got it down where we don't really need to test it. We know if it's going to work or not. We QC all the content as it comes in, but we do have a separate sort of workflow for the clients to see. And so in some cases, we have it very sophisticated, a 3D model where they can see what it looks like on the sign, or other times you're seeing it in a flat format like I showed you a few minutes ago. And so they can see from a content standpoint, is it PG rated, is it R rated or whatever. We know it's going to work because of our QC methods. So it's more about just content. We don't really test it. When we're building a sign, we do all kinds of tests and, all sorts of motion tests and brightness and angles and stuff. But once it's built and designed, it's pretty much baked in.
Okay, Chris, real quick, and then Tony.
Yeah,
and then
real
we'll move
quick,
back
I'll
to
say
questions.
I've cut a lot of strange screens and odd and extreme resolutions, and what we'll do is we'll build a 3D space where I can actually move a camera around and show people what the sign is or what the screen is going to look like from the audience. I'm usually doing auditoriums, but I did do a NASDAQ sign once, and you showed one of your templates, and I goes, oh, I think I've gotten that from you.
Right, that could be, and that's important. That 3D space is important when a client's first getting their head around what is it going to look like. Once you've done it for a year or two, they just want to see what the content is, and usually they're you don't need to do that so much.
I was actually looking at Chris Comfort, so let's get Chris's in and then Tony.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, so you're back to that tech question and brand new tech. The photo you showed of the control room, the towers were oldish. Was that an old picture? And were those towers brand new?
I took that last week, but
okay,
those
so
are
the towers
computers
themselves are not brand new, but the cards are brand new?
No. So that system, the Express system that I showed, we built that in, I want to say 05, 06, 07-ish. Boy, those dates are getting kind of fuzzy to me. But we keep them alive for a long, long time because it's kind of one of those things. Once it's built and not broken, we don't tend to rock the boat because nothing's changed about the display. So why change the back end, and so those are definitely vintage boxes, and we have a few spares that if we have to, in the cards, or the resolution on that screen isn't such that we need some new Radeon or AMD thing. Now in the new ones that we're designing, we're actually, Sedna actually has a new Linux box that they're going to, because we can just dig into the architecture better than we can with Apple stuff these days. So
okay, Tony's had his hand up for a little bit.
Tony.
Quickly, Tony, and then we'll move on to the next questions in the queue.
Okay, Phil, I'm just amazed at everything that you've shared this morning, but what's kind of blowing me away is, and maybe this is a simple question and this is, maybe not the forum to ask, but how are you sharing this information?
Keynote in an ATEM Mini. So
that's it?
Yeah,
no vMix, no Mimo Live.
I'm doing this with my ATEM Mini. That's me, and then the background is Keynote, just coming into my from a laptop onto another.
The rule
channel
there
of
is
the-
sometimes don't overthink things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Garrick
man.
Parmalee
Sure.
is in with the next question from Columbia, Missouri. What are some of the most popular LED manufacturers being used, and whose LED screens are the most reliable?
So we work with a lot of folks, and I'm not allowed to take favorites, except to say, it's funny. It changes the LED manufacturer landscape changes about every 3 years because companies get in and get out. So for a long time, Barco was a big one. Mitsubishi, Sony used to be, but they're not anymore. Panasonic used to be. Now they've acquired another company, and they're sort of sub-branding that. So we work with a lot of different LED manufacturers, and because we act as a client rep, we're not allowed to sort of push one or the other. We don't resell them or anything. So when they're building a new sign, often we'll do a shootout, or we'll do sort of we'll put in front of the client a couple of different vendors. The trick these days is, as with everything else, there's a lot of good product coming in at much cheaper prices from the Asia Pacific region, and so I don't even know the names of some of these companies, but they're really dynamite products, and so it's getting harder and harder to have quite a margin on those things. So like I said, Mitsubishi, there's a company called SNA. There's some, and they're all making great products. At this point, it's more about price. Daktronics is the only American manufacturer in the group, so they have a bit of an advantage on certain types of jobs, but they're all really good.
Okay, Roscoe Jones is in with, were there any contracts based on views or eye pairs that COVID forced into a renegotiation?
Not based on the hard tech like that, but I would tell you that many of the, as soon as COVID stopped, of course, tourism stopped, Broadway shut down, and basically that makes Times Square shut down, which means no advertising, no sales, no nothing. And very, very quickly, the ad industry suffered very poorly. I mean, everybody stopped advertising. We were putting all sorts of public service announcements up about thank you, first responders and so forth, and it's often used as a backdrop on broadcast TV, but there's really no one to speak of in Times Square even today, other than a few essential workers and so forth. But so COVID really messed up the whole industry, and it goes up the line because the sign owners, the advertisers can't pay their bills. They have commitments and contracts, and then, they can't pay the landlords, and the landlords have to. So, like everything else, it's been affected very, very hard, like everything in Broadway and New York. Yeah.
Garrick Parmalee's up next with, how do you calculate the viewing distance with pixel pitch to get a good resolution without going overboard?
So that's a great question. We used to have, and I don't even think we had a Mac, an app in the App Store called Resolution Retina Calculator, and I don't even think it exists there anymore because we haven't revved it. But the point is, there's a mathematical formula for the distance at which two dots can be discerned from a certain distance. And so you type that into a calculator, and you can know if I'm going to view something from 30 feet, I don't really need more than 10 millimeters. Anything more than 10 millimeters, meaning if I have an 8 millimeter or a 6 millimeter, I'm not going to know the difference between a 6 millimeter and a 10 millimeter screen. And
so
and
we're seeing the resolution of that H&M sign behind you. It looks like a photograph here on video.
Yeah, it's a 10 millimeter. It's a great look.
That's 10 millimeter.
It's 10 millimeter. And that, by today's standard, now that sign is 6-8 years old. By today's standards, that's kind of low tech. Everybody's going to an 8 millimeter or 4 millimeter in Times Square, and it's getting redonkulous in terms of the money they're spending on resolution, and we advise against it in most cases. Now, Indoor, it's a different thing. With if you have a client putting, like in a retail, you're putting a screen where a customer can walk right up to it, then you certainly want 1 millimeter if you can afford it. But
sure,
in Times Square, it's not necessary.
That makes sense. The next question is from our friend Talak Lopez Waterman in Florida. With moving screens, how did you keep the power and data going to them? He's specifically talking about Dallas. One's in Dallas.
Yeah. Oh, with those moving screens, right? Well, we have these big umbilical cords that fold, and it's not unlike if you've ever seen a projector that lowers out of the screen. There's sort of these mechanisms that fold all the cable and data and power, and it extends out as it moves. And so that was a really neat engineering challenge that we had put together. But that's how that works. It's
foldable cable channels. Very nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Henry Ramos.
And we didn't invent that. It's, like I said, we kind of found another industry that did it already. In this case, the roller coaster industry, and
nice.
Paired that up. Yeah.
Wow. So look around, folks, when you want ideas. Henry Ramos of Yonkers, New York is in with, is there any adjustments for weather or time of day? For example, if it's a cloudy day out, do the screens dim a bit, or is brightness the same 24/7?
Oh, not just the dimming, but the content itself. So we have campaigns that run that if it's a hot day, they're going to be selling lemonade. If it's a cold day, it's going to be selling coffee. And we have that ability for even, we had a Jeep ad that ran once that reflected whether it was snowy or rainy and so forth. And so the technology is certainly there. We can tag onto a feed from the National Weather Service or any other of these feeds that and then make if-then statements that that affect the playback. Now, the point he's bringing up is the brightness. There is this ability to adjust brightness with an optical sensor. In practice, that doesn't really work well. In Times Square, things get really dirty. The optical sensors get filmed over, and so we do dim the signs, but generally time it with sunset, and then start to dim those signs. It starts to play games with the color space and sort of the reproduction of the video, as you know on your own screen. If you start to dim it, it plays with that. But there, it's amazing how bright these things even at half power, and you don't really need full power on those things.
John Preto from Las Vegas is in with the next question. What devices are you using to stitch across multiple screens, and how much do those devices cost?
Right. So in some cases we can get away. There's sort of this crossover where if it fits within the span of say 2 4K desktops, well, we can play 2 or even 3 4K desktops seamlessly out of a big honking computer. And so basically in the processor, it's like a video wall processor. We're plugging all 3 of those DVIDs into a processor, and then basically telling the LED sign, you're going to show what shows up here. You're going to show what shows up here. And then we're just playing out big giant files. And that's kind of what our software, allows us to do. If it goes beyond that, where we need multiple computers, generally, it's very, very difficult to have 2 actual output sources from a different bus and have them clock synced perfectly. And what I mean by perfectly is you can do it in broadcast where you genlock something, but genlock gets you frame sync, but we need more than frame sync. We need scan line sync. So intra-frame sync, in order to not have there be a seam between there. Otherwise, if you had motion graphics on a seamless display, you'd see sort of a tear that happens in that. And very few things allow us to do that. So we have tricks, of course. That's where we'll get into a thing called a spider, which is a compositing box, a very, very expensive compositing box, which will take lots of video signals in and move them and let us lay them out with a lot of accuracy, and introduce delays in the timing such that we can time those pieces up together. That gets into a level of complexity that's pretty high end. And that box is anywhere, starts at like $100,000 and goes up to $300,000-$400,000.
I know the Barco ones were super expensive, right?
Right. Barco had some interesting stuff, and they're kind of backing out of the game because they weren't you know, I don't know why, but they're not really in it so much. But Spider is actually owned now by Christie Systems, which does all the big projector stuff, and so you know they're big.
Okay, Mickey is in from the panel with the next question from the Philippines. What kind of lifespans do you experience on the LED panels? How often do you need to replace them?
Yeah, so it used to be they were about 5 years. Now we rate them at about 7 years, and depending on the manufacturer, that can even stretch to 8 or 9 years. We generally prep a new client that is going to buy a screen that it's about 7 years, and then depending on budgets and things, they want to swap it out after that. But 7 is kind of the baseline right now.
Roscoe wants to know if there's a resale market for used screen panels or entire screens.
If you find one, let me know, because I got a garage full of these things. But it would take such a the trick is they're tied so intimately to this processor, to the controller, that unless you know, and all the controllers are different, and so you're stuck with a 7 or 10-year-old controller trying to figure out how it works, and it's a headache to try to figure that out.
And moving on to TJ Astor, Mr. Robat had all the screens in Times Square and all the screens changing for the show. Were you part of that process, or did they key out all the screens in post? Do you work with this type of thing for other TV shows or movies?
Which show was he referring to?
Mr. Robot, I guess, had a scene.
Oh. Yeah, so that's typically done in a movie. It's CG. We have produced that ourselves for a couple of events. I wish I had thought about showing you that. That's called a domination, and it's a very expensive thing to do because there's not like this one network that controls everything in Times Square. So it's a lot of legwork and coordination, and that's what our company does. So it's calling up all the people who own the signs and saying, do you all agree that at 7 p.m. we can run a screen? And there is one that happens, it's called a midnight moment, and it's done on behalf of the Times Square Alliance, which is sort of the business district of Times Square. And at midnight and every night, there's an art project that all the screens have agreed to run at the same time. And so every month that changes out. But if you're there at midnight, you can kind of see a cool little domination that happens for 15 minutes or so.
Nice. Stuart Fairbrother of Melbourne on the panel says, do any of the film's shooting scenes in Times Square coordinate what content goes on the signs, both for product placement and or as source lighting on the talent?
Yeah, not for source lighting is not really germane. I mean, it's just such a bear to think about. There's so many other lighting issues. We did work on a fun, most of the time these days, Spider-Man and some of these other ones, they all do it in CG. But they're often mapping what's there. But to coordinate, making the content, sending it out, it's 10 times cheaper just to do it in CG. That said, we did a couple of shoots where we did do a couple of things. We did an early Spider-Man on the ABC sign. We did there was a movie, a Robin Williams movie called Death to Smoochie, and it was about their show was a kids show production, which actually took place at the ABC studio. So we actually built a lot of content for that, and played it as playback during the show and that sort of stuff. But it's very, very rare. Live TV shows, like I said, New Year's Eve and other things, will do it as backdrops, or a lot of times IMAG will put in the an output of the program feed into the screens in order to sort of augment like a rock concert. But that's pretty much what the most of it is. Yeah.
James Babbitt's in with, what presentation software are you using to show us the diagrams of how the system works? Well, this was actually
that was all Keynote.
You touched earlier.
Yeah.
Keynote. John Idelson, who does the NASDAQ screen?
So NASDAQ has their own, so what happens is, you need a certain skill set to run these screens. And typically if you're a broadcaster, which NASDAQ is, or the NASDAQ television studio is, they've got all that talent in-house. So they actually have a group of folks in-house that are very talented. Now, we consulted with them a number of times on some special events and so forth. And, but at this point, they don't, they run it in-house. Yeah.
Okay. Michael J is in with a question. It borders on one we heard before, which is, how do you deal with ever-changing weather conditions?
We don't. It is what it is. And, we're, we're constantly, you know, when there's a bad rainstorm or a hurricane that comes through, we're out there replacing tiles. We don't physically do it. There's two companies that sort of in Times Square, you know, that's all represented union work, and there's some good stories about that. But those are the guys who change out physically when you have to go up on a crane and change something out. But other than that, there's not a lot that goes wrong that's not processor based and something we can do in the rack room. A lot of times we're picking confetti out of the back of the things because even, you know, years later, there's tons of confetti behind those things. But they're getting more and more robust these days.
Nice. Mickey's in with another question from the Philippines. What sort of color spaces are these screens capable of reproducing?
Yeah.
And since you said they're all at 50%, you're probably not going to HDMI.
Yeah, it's not better than what you'd have on a desktop computer these days. You know, it's a million colors. It's not millions, or maybe it's 2 million colors, but it's enough to do the trick. It's certainly not on par with a, you know, high end video screen that you might do your photo editing on.
Makes sense. Mickey also wants to know what the worst failure is you've ever experienced with the
Power.
system there.
And at the worst times, you know, it's like when you're in the middle of the event and 3, 2, 1, and that's been a thing. You know, we're because of the nature of it, we're pretty infosec, you know, security. We run our own LANs and routers and everything, and change those passwords and stuff. And so we're not really, there is a lot of talk about how bad it would be if somebody were to put something naughty up on the screens. And there are stories where it's happened, but not on our watch, you know, knock on wood. But you know, the worst thing we think about is power. But the nice thing is, you know, if it's a power failure in Times Square, it's nothing we did, you know. It's not like you know, it's something bigger is happening than something we did. So
all those scenes in disaster movies where some evil genius manages to change all the signs universally in an entire city at once, they're not really happening.
Yeah.
I'm shocked. Patrick Shonas said, Little Rock, Arkansas says, are there systems built on Novastar, Brompton, or another LED processing system? Are the systems built?
I do not know what like a playback system, or I don't know those names, but they could be very valid. Like I said, it's just there's so many manufacturers in this game these days that you know, anything's probable. Yeah.
David Brady says, what about dead pixels? Is the entire panel replaced, or can you get down to the pixel level to repair?
It definitely happens, and we have sort of a tolerance of how many pixels, and it's sort of per sign. So once you, but we're pretty gnarly about going out there every single day, and we've video cameras, security cameras on them that we can log in and look and you know, inspect them. And if you get over, you know, 3 or 4 pixels out, we're calling, we're replacing that module. And it's real easy because of the Lego nature of it. You can just pull that little thing. I mean, literally one of the panels is, you know, it's, you know, 12, 16 inches, and pull one out, pop a new one in, and it's good to go.
Nice. Okay. Mickey wants to know the best or coolest piece of content, an advertisement or a gag that you've had worked with on the big signs.
Well, let me show you a couple of things. That's good lead in. So this is a piece that at the H&M screen, I think anything that makes it interactive is valuable. It's funny how ignorable these screens can be. A tourist in Times Square is so overwhelmed with everything. It's just like barrage of, you know, stimulus. So if you give them something that they could, so this is a cool thing that happened. This was an interactive, I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller here, where the person could go into H&M. This is not there anymore, but it's basically there was a kiosk set up, and they would log in with their name and their address, and they would walk the runway, and this thing would take pictures. There's all a bunch of DSLRs set up, and it would tell them when to walk and when to strike a pose, and it would take all these pictures of the people, and they would get corny and, you know, and come out there and model, and, you know, this is, you know, the New York runway moment kind of thing. And so it was just sort of an automated thing that then they took a series of pictures, and then a store associate or a manager, somebody had to actually approve them. So there was a moderation tool. And then
like
basically the person would receive an email from the system and say, your spot's going to run in 7 minutes on the big sign, and it would tell them exactly what time that piece of content would run. And then at a certain time, you'd see they'd sit outside, and this is what played outside. It was like this little animated moment of all of their things, and this was all built in Unity, and so it's really sweet little piece of content. And it really gives a person their moment in lights. Anytime you put their face or their name up on the sign and they can take a picture of it, that's huge. That's really, really huge. And that's, people, love those moments. So what we did was, and that was very cumbersome in terms of, it was very expensive, and it's not the kind of thing we could reproduce a lot. So we revved the idea for fashion show. This is a big mall in Las Vegas called Fashion Show on the Strip. And so the idea here was, it was a little simpler, a little more complicated. And basically you on site, you upload pictures to Instagram and tag them a certain way. And then likewise, we would do these little shows where you would get your pictures sort of highlighted on the shows. And this is something that we can do with any sort of digital signage anywhere, and kind of make these little Instagram moment shows where people are highlighting, and they love that kind of stuff. So all those little sort of send in your social media kind of things are very, very big ideas that are fun.
People love this topic. We've only got a couple minutes left. We actually started a little late, so we'll go a little late.
It's all right. We can always. Yeah.
Hey, they're good questions. Right. Courtney says, Courtney Gooden, our friend from Hollywood, what types of files are playing out? H.264, ProRes, movie, AVI?
Yeah,
are they compressed or uncompressed?
They're not real highly specialized. We do MOV files. They're standard. ProRes is probably a little more quality than we need. We're often doing MPEGs or MP4s or pretty simple formats. You'd be
That's
surprised.
An interesting one on the Flatiron building that we're just seeing now.
That's 1 Times Square. That's the ball drop. So if you look back there, I can go back here. You can see the top of the building here. Where's my mouse? Come here. Here we go. I'll pause it. This is the one thing about Keynote. I want to scrub a video, and it's very hard to do. Go back. So you see the ball right there at the top, 2021. That's 1 Times Square. And there's about 3 or 4 signs on the face of that. They're actually getting ready to. This is a big project. They're not really allowed to say a lot, but it's going to change a lot in the next year or two. And it's going to be a very, very cool, attraction in Times Square.
Okay, moving on, then we'll save you from getting into NDA trouble.
Yeah. Stay tuned. It'll be. We'll tell you a lot about it as it grows.
Mark Hadley of. Go ahead. Mark Hadley of Seattle asks, what's the role of web browsers and HTML, CSS on these public screens?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because when we want to do something interactive, often we're basically saying to any of the ad agencies or whatever, give us an HTML5 link, and we can just schedule that as a piece of content. It's really cool. So if the HTML page is set up, laid out so that it fits within the raster of the screen, you can design anything you want on the page, and it'll just show up as a piece of content, as long as it's all set up well. So we're often developing in well, not Flash, but HTML5 is our preferred kind of author tool for interactive stuff.
Rachel Ann Clifton says, Phil, having a billboard in Times Square is such an aspiration for so many people. Have you ever been moved to tears for having seen your work in this iconic landmark?
No.
It's just work for you.
No, I mean, it's fun seeing things big, and it can be overwhelming when you see your work. I think in any movies and anything, that when it's bigger than life, and but I think at the end of the day, we're advertising here, and I don't think there's a lot of. It's fun. And I'm lucky to be able to do some of this work, and I get that. But it's
You ever
it's
put your own
certainly-
picture on Times Square? Just
I actually
confess.
I did a couple of personal things. Yeah.
There you go. Ed Willock, Valley College, New York, says, how many nits do you spec for the LED walls you use in Times Square? Is it
Yeah.
res
So
nits?
the brightness is oh man, maybe Warren, I think you're watching. You can text me on this one. Some of the tech stuff. It's I think we get to 10,000 nits on some of this outdoor stuff. I
You're
may be
very
wrong on that.
HDR then.
What's that?
You're very Rec 2020 HDR.
Yeah. It can be pretty bright. I mean, what we do is we certainly spec that it goes very, very high, but then again, we're never in practice actually using it that much. Yeah, 10.
You know, that's
10,000
fascinating.
nits.
I always wondered why that spec was there, because
Thanks,
that is so bright for the video work that I would normally do, that I thought, why did they go all the way up to 10,000 nits? And you just answered the question.
Yeah.
Exterior billboards could
Right.
use that.
And even then, it's just it's blindingly bright.
Yeah.
And especially when we're doing on-air stuff, we're often blasting the brightness. We're blowing out cameras, so we have to crank it down to 10% when we're on camera in order to balance what's going on in front of the screen.
Fascinating. Ed Willock of Valley College, New York, back again. What LED processors are most commonly used in the Times Square build?
That's the problem. They're all specific to the manufacturer. So we can't sit there and say, well, we want to use this processor in this screen. You kind of are stuck with whatever comes by the manufacturer. So
cool.
We don't have a favorite, although, yeah, some are better than others.
Stephen Kimbrough, Berkeley, California, and the panel often. I noticed the H&M red does not match having a red part of the logo to deal with. Do you ever have issues with color accuracy like
Absolutely. And often, as any other ad people know, you're sitting there taking what's the blue of your brand, the red of your brand. That's our baseline. We're going to start with that. And then everybody else is going to be tweaked in around that. So, the Coke sign in Times Square that's an issue. H&M, they weren't a stickler, but ABC certainly was with their yellow. We worked a lot with NBC, and they've got 6 colors in their logo. So they, they're
Tiffany
all
blue for the boxes. That's
Yeah.
like, if you are one semitone off of that, it's like not good enough.
Right.
Peter Sargent said, how does this wall compare to the video light walls used in The Mandalorian?
Well,
So
the technology's the same. Certainly, it's the same, technology. When you're filming at super high resolutions, quality is going to probably be, there's less tolerance in Times Square. You can get away with a lot more than you can when it's going to be recorded on film.
Understood. Roscoe Jones has our second to the last question. It won't be too late. That's good. He asked, what technology was in place 20 to 40 years ago? When did Times Square, quote, light up?
Well,
Remember it back then?
right. So two-part question. If you're asking about video, like video screens, the ABC screen we worked on was one of the very first of its kind in 1999. There was one or two smaller ones, but in terms of really interactive and kind of doing some really cool video stuff, it was the first of its kind. The LED technology was, years before that, but sort of as outdoor signage. That was, if you're talking about just lighting up Times Square, I mean, it's been lit up, since the 20s and 30s with, lit billboards, creative, dimensional billboards and stuff. Yeah.
Probably neon and stuff like that.
Right.
back
Exactly.
then.
Neon was the quintessential lighting at the time.
Yeah, kind of like Las Vegas in its early days, and it was just
Right.
a big neon jungle of stuff. So,
Exactly.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Dick Lieber of Chicago has, how much power do signs like these draw?
Well, surprisingly less than it used to. Funny enough, the trend has been more and more pixels, but less and less power draw, because the LEDs that they're using are becoming much, much more efficient. So as you know, even in your home, you can get a 75 watt equivalent light bulb, but it only draws 15 watts of power. Well, it's the same LED essentially that's drawing these things. So, while the displays themselves are, not insignificant, they're much, much greener than the neon lights or the bigger lights from before. It would be hard to put a number on it, but that same sort of equivalent would work. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
those are
Mickey,
all
you
the
had a-
actual. I have one more question for
Oh,
you
go
though,
ahead.
and this is the most important one, and I've been thinking about it for the last 15 minutes.
Okay.
You said you have a garage full of all these pieces of signs. I want to know how much your neighbors all hate you, because you must have the most incredible Christmas light display on the
No,
planet with
you'd be
thousands of
surprised.
panels in
You
your
would
garage.
never recognize. It's like the plumber having the worst plumbing. That's
busman's holiday.
No,
then
we're
you do
we're
not.
way under. I don't want to be messing with that stuff. Mickey, you
I
had
was
a quick
thinking
question?
60-foot walls of screens doing Christmas display around your house.
All right, Mickey, you had a question.
Yeah, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it, but is there some sort of like competition between like brightness from screen providers,
It used to
or
be,
some
but
regulation maybe?
no, there's no. As a matter of fact, Times Square, they actually encourage you. They don't allow you to build a building without putting something obnoxious on the outside of the building. Basically, it's a code there, and it's part of their their brand. So brightness used to sort of be, but once everybody could compete with brightness, now the biggest thing is how big can you build the screen, sort of this one contiguous surface. And there are some really big single surface screens at really high resolutions. But my feeling is the only people that appreciate it are us in this group and a couple of other LED manufacturers. The tourists that go there don't know the difference. It's all wow to them. And so, and another time I can tell you stories about the content that we use and the way we get attention with the content. That to me is so much more effective than a bigger screen or whatever. So that's with anything else. Yeah, Greg?
Is there any particular reason for using a one-piece screen instead of
No, because you can. It's just sort of the
Really?
style of the day. And and I think architecturally some of the multi-pieces are more interesting. It just, it's just sort of architects sort of, I think they're starting to phone it in, and they're just saying, okay, what's the canvas, and let's just stick a skin on this building, and it's just this big surface. They think that it's going to equate to being able to sell more ads, but in practice, that's not the case.
Hey, Phil, thank you so much. This has been an outstanding office hours. I've had as much fun with this one and learned as much as
Well,
I think
thanks.
I've in any
And
of the other ones.
it's one of those things. I do talk for hours about it, so I'm happy to anytime answer questions. But I'm just glad we could fill a time and invite you all to Times Square when we're back and running, and we'll take a little walking tour sometime. That would be a lot of
Awesome.
fun.
That would be great. Let's
Yeah.
hope that things clear up and we're able to travel like that again very,
Yeah.
very soon.
Good.
So I think now the post-show question that I misasked earlier comes into play. I'm not exactly sure who launches that, but hopefully there will be one. And so look, I maybe click there and see. I don't have control of that. I'm sure I don't. Only Alex really has the show controls. So it may be there, it may not. Keep your fingers crossed. Thanks everybody for coming to office hours today. We will be back tomorrow morning, same time, same place. Thank you all, both panelists and attendees who watched the show, and we'll see you same time tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.